Welcome everyone to Agile Talks by Agile Gurus on Tuesdays. Today, our topic for our live video podcast is basics of Agile. So we're going to be discussing about different frameworks that are under Agile, and what are some of the differences and some common misperception that people have about different frameworks. And today we have Reha from Agile Gurus as our coach and our speaker here on the podcast. People who don't know Reha has been a coach, an enterprise coach in Agile for more than a decade, mostly with financial industries. So welcome, Reha, and thank you for joining us. So I'm going to just get into most of the questions that people have sent us last week. So what is Agile? How do you define Agile?
Trick question, Rahul. All right, you start the one. The way I would personally define Agile is it's an umbrella term, right? It's an umbrella term for a variety of methods which differ from the traditional waterfall development processes, and which are the likes of Scrum, of Kanban, and other specific frameworks. What they all though have in common, all of these different frameworks within Agile, is the concept of iterative development strategies, right? They're breaking down into a series of smaller activities and then incrementally or iteratively delivering value on an ongoing basis to the customer. And what this allows is it allows for work to be carried out more flexibly and teams to respond quickly to any changing requirements. What we've seen is teams which have focused from traditional waterfall to Agile, they've noticed of adapting all of the strategy of Agile, it offers, at least it promises to offer a range of benefits for the business. You see an improved ability to manage shifting priorities because we are now delivering incrementally in smaller cycles. So it allows us to pivot more often and more frequently. It allows for increased productivity, and then it allows for improved alignment between the business units and the IT departments. If our listeners haven't read there is a book which came out very recently, the Phoenix Project, right? That was the initial one, and more recently the Unicorn Project. They're both by the same writer. The initial book, the Phoenix Project, talks a lot about all of this friction about business units. It's focused on DevOps, it's focused on Agile, but it shows you the value incremental development brings, right? One of the other added advantages is reducing costs, because you're bringing down the transaction cost, you're bringing down the holding costs through Agile. So we've noticed a lot of things, but essentially that's essentially what it is, a big giant umbrella of various frameworks which offer iterative development.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you for that. So you talked about different methodologies, and then the art itself. So how would you differentiate between Agile, Scrum, and Kanban? Could you expand that a little bit for everyone?
Sure. On that note, is it possible I can do a quick screen share?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just for this, I created this this is just one slide which I wanted to show. I've spoken about Agile being an umbrella, and I wanted to show visual to our listeners and to those who are watching us live about how it is, right? You've got Agile, which is the giant umbrella, and then you've got these various frameworks or methodologies which fall under it. You've got Scrum, you've got Lean, you've got Crystal, XP, Kanban, DSDM, RUP, FTD, and then you move to the scaled Agile methodologies, like which I've not covered here, but SAFe, DAD, LESS, Scrum at Scale. These are all the various scaling methodologies which all also fall under the Agile umbrella, right? On the right, you've got this little visual, which is the State of Agile survey. For our listeners, again, this is a good artifact to refer to. State of the Agile is a report which is created yearly. It's free of cost on the internet. You can just simply Google State of Agile and you'll get a lot of information. And they create some information from the industry, they gather it and they share. As you can see, when it comes to methodologies being used, Scrum is the highest used. So essentially, if you want to read this graph, you're going from right all the way to the left. The methodology on the right is the highest used, which is Scrum, followed by some Scrum XP hybrid. Then you got a custom hybrid, then something called Scrumban, which is a combination of using Kanban for Scrum, followed by Kanban and just I don't know what I'm doing, and various other things. So there are a lot of methodologies. A lot of people replace the words Scrum and Agile a lot. They're not the same thing. Scrum is a methodology within the Agile framework. All of these items which you see on the left of the screen all fall under the umbrella of Agile. So it's important for everybody to know that you cannot use these words interchangeably. Agile is a way to do, or it's a framework, a mindset of how you achieve iterative development. Scrum and all of the other methodologies are laid out frameworks which assist the teams to get to the iterative development, right? And then you
Yeah.
scale Agile using the various scaled methodologies.
Interesting. So, can the book that you talked about, the State of Agile Survey, I guess, right?
It's not a
Can
book, it's a report.
Oh, it's a report. Okay. Like, would it actually tell our listeners to, like, if they go look at that report, would it tell like what is XP, what is
No,
agile modeling?
that's not what the State of the Agile will cover. It will cover some training. It's a combination of a lot of information which they gather from the industry, any new methodology, how is the adaptation going, success stories, white papers. It will talk about these kind of graphs which you see on the screen. I've obtained it from the State of the Agile report for 2019. You can, and it's a yearly publication, so you can go out there and read a lot of context of how the various industries are adapting it.
Gotcha.
Before, so Kanban, for example, came from the manufacturing industry, but it was adapted by open arms in the IT, in the software industry. And now you're seeing Agile going even into military. That was
Right.
one of the things which was in the State of the Agile report very recently, was how the military is adopting Kanban and Scrum and things like that.
Interesting.
Not Scrum, but Kanban. So those are the kind of the things the State of the Agile report will cover.
Got you. All right. Thank you for that visual.
No problem.
Yeah, that was good. Okay. So, I guess a next question that's follows what you just talked about is we hear so much about the two team level methodologies, right? Which is Scrum and the Kanban. These are the two big ones that everyone is using nowadays. If I were to ask you to give me top 3 or 4 differences between the two, which could help the teams decide which to pick over other, what would you recommend?
When teams go and they start talking methodologies or are coming brand new into Agile, I highly suggest getting somebody who is experienced in the field, a senior coach, to come in, leverage your COE to help you do the state of the union kind of a report, right? What is where you are standing? Scrum and Kanban both offer very different benefits. Both are iterative development processes. Scrum is extremely time boxed. Scrum offers a lot of structure. There is actually a Scrum guide which is available. Our listeners can download the Scrum guide by going on Google. It's a 17 to a 19-page document which is available free of cost to anybody. I highly suggest, if you've not read it, please go ahead and consult and read the Scrum guide. It's light reading. It's about 17 pages if you don't include the prefix and the table of contents and everything. It will take you about an hour or two. I personally have read it and I continue reading it every 6 months. It gives you a lot of insight. And believe me, every time I read that guide, there's something in there which goes, aha, I didn't know about this, or I didn't realize it. So it's even for more seasoned coaches. Go ahead and reference to it. But essentially, Scrum will give you a lot of structure. So teams which are coming brand new into Agile, it offers them a way to shift laterally, if I might say so, into an Agile methodology from waterfall, because they're coming from a lot of structure. They're coming from a development which had a lot of structure in place, had roles and responsibilities in place, and that is what Scrum offers too. Both methodologies are based on the pull system. That essentially means you're not, there is no role which is allotting or assigning work to people. You're supposed to pull it. The advantage Kanban provides you is the board, the visualization, right? That's what it comes with: whips, work in progress, limits. So the focus of Kanban is to manage the flow, right? One of the things which I do suggest to teams is look at the nature of your work. If you have changing requirements often, or if you are a brand new team, or you're building a brand new product, rather, not a brand new team, but if you're building a brand new product, or if you are a customer support group, or you are a group which handles production tickets, Kanban would work well because it allows you to change your priorities often. You're not supposed, you don't have to have fixed requirements. You're not time boxed to an iteration, though most Kanban teams do time box themselves, right? Scrum gives you a lot of focus. So maintenance teams which do not have changing priorities very often, and by often I mean not on a daily or daily basis or every week, for example, Scrum is a better fit because Scrum will allow you to go into the 4 stages of the team: this forming, storming, norming, and performing very clearly. It will offer a lot of structure in terms of ceremonies. Both of these methodologies, you can adopt the ceremonies, right? So even Kanban teams should be doing grooming, should be planning, should be prioritizing, and should be demoing, but they do have the freedom to do that at their own time, right? In Kanban, in Scrum, it gives you a lot more structure. So these would be the few things which I would ask teams to look out for when they are choosing. One of the anti-patterns, which I always tell Scrum Masters and coaches, is if your team is coming to you and saying, we want to go Kanban because 2-week iterations don't work for us because what we do is entirely different. We're building rockets here, right? No.
Right.
That should not be the reason to switch your methodology, right? In the past, I have even gone back and I have told teams, if you are doing 2-week iterations and you don't feel you can break your stories down smaller and you want to go 3 weeks or you want to go Kanban, move to mini sprints, move to 1 week, right? Challenge them.
Yeah.
Find the right reasons would be my suggestion.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I've definitely seen teams trying to, bring Kanban on board just because they have heard that with Kanban, they don't have to do all the grooming, they don't have to do story pointing and slicing, etc. And one good point that you brought up, anti-patterns, right? One of the anti-pattern I remember I saw in one of the teams was they were doing Scrum, they were adopting to Scrum, but because they were not completing stories at the end of the sprint, they were like, well, let's just do Kanban so we can just keep going with the stories, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is something to be aware of for
Yeah,
sure.
that should not be the reason why your team chooses Kanban as a methodology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So, and then, well, what are some final thoughts around resources you would like to share with the listeners?
When it comes to resources, personally for me, my first stop is going on the websites of these providers. You've got Scrum Alliance, you've got scrum.org, you've got, a lot of YouTube videos. So go there, download the Scrum guide. Like I said, the State of the Agile report is a great guide to look out for. I'm all about trying to get a lot of information free, as our listeners must have realized from the past podcasts. Free tools, free resources. So YouTube is a great resource. I think our webinars are a great resource. So they should reach out to coaches. In your organizations, find a mentor. Find a more senior coach who can take you through this. When it comes to learning about methodologies, the Scrum Guide is great. There is no formal document which I'm unfortunately aware of when it comes to Kanban, but YouTube offers great tutorials. There are some great blogs and posts out there on LinkedIn which will provide you that information. One of our coaches can help you, definitely, if you need a more detailed kind of distinction or you need some help with coaching. Find one of our coaches or find a coach in your organization, but there's a lot of stuff out there which you can download for free. So my first stop would be to go into one of these, all of these providers, like even Agile Alliance, for that sake. They've got a lot of white papers on Agile. Scrum.org does, Scrum Alliance does, like the Scrum Guide. Safe does. Safe offers some great resources. So try and research on the internet. It's full of it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Just going back to one of the questions we talked about, Scrum and Kanban differences, right? So we're not saying that in Kanban, you don't have to groom, you don't
Totally.
have to not do stand-ups, right? I just want to make sure like we tell that to people who are listening, and especially who are very new to agile world, because that is one of the anti-pattern that
Yeah.
people fall into.
Oh
Can
no.
you can you talk a little bit more about like that, like the difference and the similarities, plus also maybe how does a team that is following Kanban fits with other teams within the train, and do PIs and all that?
Mhm. Um, there are two parts of this question, Raul, and I'll answer them in two parts. The first part was about the Kanban team itself and the ceremonies which go with it, and the second part was how would they fit into a scaled model, if you might say so, where there are other teams and they are following a different methodology. To answer the first part, Kanban teams absolutely need to do all of the ceremonies a Scrum team does. The ceremonies themselves are not dependent on the framework. They're independent of the framework you are using or the methodology of your choice. Kanban teams should be grooming, they should be planning, they should be retrospecting, they should be demoing, and they should have stand-ups, right? All of these ceremonies are important. The only difference between Scrum and Kanban teams is if you go with Scrum, it offers you a great structure. It will tell you exactly what to do. It will tell you do the planning on the first day of the sprint, right? It will tell
Yeah,
you that the demo and the retrospective should occur on the last day of the sprint. And the sprint typically is anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks, according to the Scrum Guide. Typically, we've seen 2 to 3 week sprints,
right.
right? So it gives you that structure. It will even tell you the amount of days to start. It will tell you do not start your sprints on Mondays, do not end your sprints on Fridays. So it's extremely structured, it's extremely informative. With Kanban, however, they're not offering you any guidance because there is no official guidance on Kanban. It's about visualization, right? That's what the Kanban board does very well. So the intent is that you still need a system to be able to pull stories, right? So it is the job of the Scrum Master, some places call them Kanban Masters, Jedi Masters, whatever you might want to call them, right? But what you need to do is go ahead and have those same ceremonies replicated to the Kanban team. I've seen some places where the grooming is called the refinement, right? That's how they're distinguishing Kanban teams from Scrum teams. Or the planning is called the replenishment ceremony. You still have stand-ups, right? And they are retroing and demoing. The only difference is going to be the length of the iteration, right? And that is what the team should be defining. That at what period are we going to go back into the cycle? What Kanban is offering you is that opportunity of constantly prioritizing your backlog, your team backlog, right? You're not freezing the scope of the iteration at the beginning of the iteration like you would in a sprint. If you've read about Scrum, or if you've not read about Scrum, then please do. But essentially, at the start of the iteration or the start of the sprint, you freeze your backlog, right? You prioritize it, you load up your sprint, and then you freeze it. And it's highly unsuggested to touch the backlog of the iteration when the sprint is in flight. That's what the Scrum Guide will tell you. That's the guidance, the official guidance for Scrum. Kanban offers you the flexibility of revisiting those priorities early and often, but just ensuring that the team has enough work where it doesn't stop, right? So I think the ceremonies are important. Teams should not be moving back from it. And if you are a Scrum Master or a coach for a team which is trying to go Kanban, the essence is you still need to put some structure around those teams,
Right.
right? That's the intent.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And a great tip from Alicia: limit your whip.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You
Yeah.
have to limit your whip. I agree, Alicia, completely. And whip is tricky because too low a whip, or actually too high a whip, and you will miss the bottlenecks, and too low a whip, you will not be able to see the full benefit of Kanban. So revisit them early and often. Do not wait till the retro to revisit your whips. If you're a brand new team getting into Kanban, even if in Scrum, I think whip limits apply to both Scrum and Kanban teams.
Right.
It's a great tool. right? And I think it's the boards, the tools which kind of limit us, because if you are setting up your board as a Kanban board and say Jira or Rally, it will allow you to enter WIP limits. And if you are entering it as a Scrum team, it will not allow you to do that. And what I do is you try and hack the system, and then you put the WIP limits in the name of the column header, right? You do something of all of that sort, but it's important that we do this.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay. So one last question, I promise, is a lot of times when I spoke to people about Kanban versus Scrum, etc., a lot of people had this notion in mind, right? Because Kanban came from car manufacturing company. That's how it started. Now, on the conveyor belt, there are phases. Someone is putting the screws, someone is attaching, et cetera, right? So, how true is it in the practical world when you have a story that moves through the board?
Mm-hmm.
It goes through every phase, and then everyone knows exactly what needs to be done in that phase, and this is exactly how much time it's going to take in that phase.
Right.
How true is it? Or is that exactly how it's supposed to be?
I think it's not one size fits all when it comes to Kanban. Again, coming back to the basis of Kanban, the full power of Kanban is realized when you have the correct WIP limits established, and the board is your is in your information radiator,
Right.
right?
But which takes a few weeks, a month, or something, right?
Absolutely. I think the
Especially
first
for
step
the new
is to do
teams.
that value stream mapping.
Right.
It's very important. You need to understand how the value flows for your team and what steps are important in that value stream mapping process. And this is not your organizational value stream for the art, but even from a team. So is it important, for example, is it important for my team to know that when has a story been finished development and when it's ready for testing? For some teams, it might be. I've seen, especially in the public sector, where development is outsourced to a contractor and the testing resides internally with the federal government or the feds or the client. It is
Yeah.
important for them to visualize that step because it's for contractual purposes, right? So it's important to understand what is necessary. For another team, which is extremely high functioning and cross functional, it might not make sense to visualize the distinction between development and testing. They're okay with it just being in progress, right? Your board will evolve as your team matures. The work steps in that process of getting items to done will evolve as the team matures. As the team is newer, they need to visualize more steps. And yes, to your point, it is important because they are clear visual indicators of when an item is ready to move to the next step. Remember, Kanban is a pull system.
Right.
So your WIP limit should be established on each item in the lead time, right? I even tell teams to ensure that they have WIP limits for analysis ready or ready for pickup items before, because you do not want stale requirements. That you're losing the entire benefit of Kanban if you do so, right? So it's important to visualize each step in the beginning, yes, but as a team might mature, you might notice, to your point, that the visualization decreases, and that would be the time when you should revisit the information radiator you have in place.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. And that brings us to the end of our podcast today, guys. And thank you very much for attending the podcast today, being plugged in, and sending your questions in advance. This is really helpful for us too, guys. Thank you so much. And that being said, if you guys have more topics, or if you like to be a speaker at Agile Talks with us, feel free to contact us at rk@myagilegurus.com, and we'll see you next week this time.
Thank you. It was
Thank
wonderful.
you, guys.